Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome, greetings. I'm Dr. Jamel D. Carter, the senior pastor of Greater Blessings, where we are community driven to empower and transform lives with the gospel of Jesus Christ. I do thank you for joining us this morning. I hope you have come with your hearts open and your spirit prepared for life transformation and sustained growth. I hope you have come with your tools needed for life transformation. With that said, I hope you have your Bible, a highlighter, a pen, pencil, and you're ready to hear what God has for us through our teacher this morning, Deaconess Ronda Sims. If you reside in the Southern California area, I do want to extend a personal invitation to you and your family to join us in person for worship on this afternoon. Our church is located in the city of Ontario. Our address is 110 North Vine Avenue, Ontario, California, 91762. If you missed any of our previous services, please go back and listen. You can listen to our Sunday morning prayer with Deaconess Brenda Fletcher. You can listen to previous streams of our ministry with Deaconess Brenda Fletcher. Deaconess Ronda Sims. You can listen to our previous Sunday morning devotions, as well as our afternoon worship, as well as our Wednesday pastoral Bible studies. In addition, if you are a Christian leader, executive, business owner, or someone who resides or aspires to be in the C-suite, I highly recommend you listen to the Canis Consulting Group's content, which is designed for Christian leaders and executives. I do acknowledge those of you who are part of this ministry. We do acknowledge our board of directors, all our leadership team, those who hold various positions, those of you watching via Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and GBEFI.com. I thank you for your continued support of this ministry through your prayers, your financial contributions, and the countless hours you have spent volunteering to make the vision into a reality. You have played a role in the growth of this ministry. Our ministry will continue to expand our reach and impact many lives because of people like you. If you have been touched or impacted by this ministry, please consider sowing or donating to the ministry. There are 3 ways in which you can give. You can give in person during worship service. You can give digitally through Cash App, Venmo, and Givelify, or you can mail your gifts to P.O. Box 13128, San Bernardino, California. All that information is in the description. Every gift, no matter the amount, is accepted. Select your level of support today. I invite you to like this video, to follow, to subscribe, to comment, tag people into our study on today, as well as share. Take the challenge and send today's study to 7 of your contacts. With that said, you're now in the hands of our teacher, Deaconess Ronda Sims.
Amen. Good morning. We are continuing in our study of 2 Samuel, and we are going to start 2 Samuel in chapter 9 at the first verse. So just looking back, a review of last week, we see David's triumphs. He has defeated the Philistines. He took control of their cities. He defeated Moab, and he defeated the Arameans. So every battle that David faced, every people group, every army that came up against Israel, God gave him favor, and he defeated them. And David was showing himself to be a good king. And he, even in his defeat of the other nations, he would make treaties with them, and he just didn't go in and utterly destroy them. And he only attacked as a defense measure. He didn't just go out and seek people to conquer. And that kind of if you look at our news now and you see different countries just going in and just wanting to conquer and destroy and to take over and for power and to rule. But David was a king placed by God, and his desire was to rule over Israel, not necessarily to conquer the world, but as God gave him more land and people, he did rule justly and honestly. So we are going to pick up again in chapter 9. Before we start, does anyone have any insights or thoughts or questions or from last time before we move on?
I
No,
think
I'm
you did
clear.
a good job.
Okay, so thank you. So starting chapter 9, verse 1, it says, Then David said, Is there yet anyone left of the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? Now there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba, and they called him to David, and the king said to him, Are you Ziba? And he said, I am your servant. And the king said, Is there not yet anyone of the house of Saul to whom I may show kindness of God? And Ziba said to the king, There is still a son of Jonathan who is crippled in both feet. So the king said to him, Where is he? And Ziba said to the king, Behold, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, in Lodabar. Then King David sent and brought him from the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, from Lodabar. So we see here that David made a promise to Jonathan, and he also made a promise to God that he would always take care of his family. And so Jonathan was aware, and he knew that David would one day be king, even though Jonathan was the son of Saul. And probably if Saul had lived a righteous life and died gloriously, then Jonathan would have been probably the next person for the throne. There were other sons that died with Saul, but Jonathan, the Bible just shows the relationship that he had with David. So Jonathan knew that David was going to be the next king, and Jonathan had asked David, to always show love to his family. And so if we remember when Saul died in battle, not only did he die, but Jonathan and all of his other sons died. And so it had been prophesied that no one from the house of Saul would ever remain on the kingdom. And at that point, God had already promised that David would be king. And so David made that promise to Jonathan, and then also to God, that when he became king, that he would remember the house of Saul. So in these first couple of verses, we see that David is saying, he wants to fulfill that promise. He wants to keep the promise that he made to Jonathan. And he asked his servants or staff, and they told him that, there was someone left, Ziba, and that he would know, what was going on with the house of Saul. So he calls Ziba to him, and he tells him, there is a son of Jonathan, an heir to Jonathan. And if you remember back when in 1 Samuel, when the housemaid had Mephibosheth, I always kind of mess up his name. And in her rush to try to escape from the Philistines, she dropped him. And so he was disabled from birth, or from 5 years old when this happened. So all of these years that had gone by, he was disabled. He needed someone to take care of him. And because the kingdom had been stripped from Saul, even though he was an heir, he was sort of I guess you could say, kind of living not in poverty, but not where his, from where his family came. He had to be cared for. So they told David about Mephibosheth. And so David said, go bring him to me. So verse 6. So Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face and prostrated himself. And David said, Mephibosheth, and he said, here is your servant. And David said to him, do not fear, for I will surely show kindness to you for the sake of your father Jonathan, and will restore to you all the land of your grandfather Saul, and you shall eat at my table regularly. So, just imagine this man who was handicapped, couldn't walk, and then he gets summoned by, King David. So, he probably is afraid. All of his family, all of the household of Saul has been destroyed. And so he probably didn't know if David was viewing him, as a threat to his kingdom. So remember the other, I think it was his son Ishbosheth, and so he sort of was a weak person, but he got manipulated into claiming the kingdom, and we see how it ended for him. And so Mephibosheth is like, is this David, gonna kill me or hurt me or what? But that was, really contrary. So David is telling him, don't be afraid. Don't be a fear. I'm not here to hurt you. And he goes, I'm just here to show kindness. And he said, because of your father Jonathan. And we know that they had such a close relationship. And if we think about it, in our own natural lives, if we have just someone that we're really close to, a really good friend, or even a family member, and then what if they, their children become orphans? We saw that a lot with COVID, where mothers and fathers were dying, of COVID and leaving, children behind. They were becoming instant orphans. So would you be willing, to step up and, take those children or that child into your house and to care for them or provide for them or to make a way for them? And this is what David was doing, out of his love and out of his friendship and out of the companionship he shared with Jonathan. He wanted to make sure that whoever was left was taken care of. And so he didn't want Mephibosheth to be afraid, because he was there sort of as his savior. And then when we look at this, our God shows us that same kindness, even though, we could be out there and not doing well, just not serving God, but he comes to us and he tells us, don't be afraid, put your trust and your faith in me, and I will take care of you.
There are 2 points, I think, in terms of what you were just saying. We see there that the responsibilities of godparents and the need of godparents to step in and take care of those that may be orphaned. We kind of see that with this relationship. But then also just looking at David and David's understanding of who he was and his purpose. Unlike Saul, who was threatened by David, who tried to end him, David knew that the kingdom was his, and there was nothing that anyone can do to take it away from him, because God promised it to him. It allowed for him to be there and encourage, help, and assist. I bring that to how we may see application in in our jobs, in our careers. Sometimes people may have went for the same position, and people will step into these high level positions, and when they find out that maybe one of their direct reports also competed for the position, they're quick to try to dismiss the individual out of fear or their own personal insecurity. And I think if we learn anything from David, We should learn that when God has given you something, you should know that it's not going to easily be taken from you because it's part of God's divine plan for your life. There's no need to undercut or try to manipulate a situation to sustain a kingdom that's already yours.
Right. And at this point, David was the true king of Israel. So, I mean, he was the man, he was the one in control. So it wasn't like he was, when he was running from Saul, um, you know, he knew that God was with him, but he didn't know how long that he was going to be in that situation. But God delivered him from all that. So, he didn't have to worry about someone coming and trying to take what was his, because it was outright given it to him. And not just by God, but he had the respect and the acceptance of the people. All of Israel claimed him to be king. But you're so right. People they always, they don't mind crawling over someone. And we see as we go on in the next chapter how um, when you get position, it's just good to have good people to give you good godly advice, because sometimes you can listen to the wrong people. And sometimes the people who aren't even a threat to you, you can perceive as a threat because of, you're insecure. So it kind of goes both ways. Sister Darlene or Sister Rolanda, do you have any thoughts, questions, comments?
No, I'm just listening.
Okie dokie. Okay. Verse 7, David said to him, "Do not fear, for I will surely show kindness to you for the sake of your father Jonathan, and will restore to you all the land of your grandfather Saul, and you shall eat at my table regularly." Again, he prostrated himself and said, "What is your servant that you should regard a dead dog like me?" So David is saying, again, don't be afraid. You have nothing to fear from me. He goes, "I'm doing this out of respect for your father." And he says, even out of respect for your grandfather Saul, because he was a king. He was a king. And he says, "I will restore to you all the land of your grandfather." So imagine being the king, you had to have wealth and land and everything. So all of this was taken away from him when his family died. But David has said, "I'm going to give all this back to you." Now, David is a king. All of that would rightly belong to him. But he's like, "No, I'm going to give it to you." And not only that, he says, "You will eat at my table regularly." So it's like, okay, I'm going to give you everything that was taken from you, and then you are going to eat at the king's table. You're going to have a special place in my household. So you're always going to be taken care of. And so Mephibosheth, he's laying down bowing for David, and he calls himself a dead dog. And when I was reading a commentary, is he said that um, they believe because of he was handicapped, he had a physical difficulty, he couldn't walk, and so he was saying that I'm useless, I can't do anything, um, so I'm not a threat to you, and that and I don't even have any value. And so, but if we think about that in our own self, we can lack in certain areas. We could be physically lacking, we can be mentally lacking, financially lacking, or, whatever. Even when God called Moses, he said he didn't want to go because he felt that he couldn't speak well. But God can take whatever we think as a negative or a hardship, and he can still bless us through it. We don't have to be the perfect person. We don't have to be 6 feet tall and look like an Adonis and, be beautiful and all of that, because those are just outward physical things that really don't mean anything. God looks at the heart of man. And if we are living a life before him, God will bless us. bless us abundantly more than we can ever think or imagine. Now, just think, Mephibosheth has been disabled since he was 5 years old. He has had caretakers his entire life. He's a grown man now. Do you think he ever thought that one day David or anybody was going to ride in on their white horse and just change his situation? So no matter where we are, how bad it looks, our situation can change instantly. One day you can be down and out and have no idea where your next blessing is going to come from. And someone can just knock on your door and give you everything that you are in need of. God knows when to show up and when the right time is. And that's what he did for Mephibosheth. So verse 9, then the king called Saul's servant Ziba and said to him, all that belonged to Saul and to all his house I have given to your master's grandson. You and your sons and your servants shall cultivate the land for him, and you shall bring in the produce so that your master's grandson may have food. Nevertheless, Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, shall eat at my table regularly. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, according to all that my lord the king commands his servant, so your servant will do. So Mephibosheth ate at David's table as one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah, and all who lived in the house of Ziba were servants to Mephibosheth. So Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, for he ate at the king's table regularly. Now he was lame in both feet. So not only did David take him in, he took in his family also. And so he became a son of the palace. So he held a great position there. And so not only did he do that, David gave him a business. So he gave him all of his land. He took Ziba and his sons and his servants, and they now became the servants of Mephibosheth. And so he had a place at the king's table. He had land, and now he had business. So he could grow his crops, feed his home, and he always had something. And that's just God. That's just the grace of God in his life. And God will do the same thing for us. He will send people into our lives to bless us. He will give us ideas on, how to be self-sufficient and to have our own thing where we don't have to lean and depend on anyone else for our sustenance. God will provide for us in that way, and not just for a minute. But so what David did was not only going to take care of Mephibosheth, take care of his sons, but his sons' and any future generations that was going to come after him. Okay, moving on to chapter 10. So now it happened afterwards that the king of the Ammonites died, and Hanun, his son, became king in his place. Then David said, I will show kindness to Hanun, the son of Nahash, just as his father showed kindness to me. So David sent some of his servants to console him concerning his father. But when David's servants came to the land of the Ammonites, the princes of the Ammonites said to Hanun, their lord, do you think that David is honoring your father because he has sent consolers to you? Has David not sent his servants to you in order to search the city, to spy it out and overthrow it? So here we have a situation where David is trying to repay a kindness. The king has died, and his son is now taking the throne. And so David is like, okay, your father showed kindness to me, So I'm going to show kindness to you. I'm going to send people to you to help you, to console you in your time of grief. And here we have these princes, these people who have the king's ear. Instead of just taking the gesture at face value, you have these individuals whispering to the king saying, no, he's not coming here, to offer their condolences. He's just want to spy out so he can conquer you and take what he has. And so because of that, the kind of a war breaks out. And so we need to learn how to recognize when God is doing something for us, because a lot of times people will be telling you things, especially about other people, turning your heart against them, making you look at them sideways like they're doing something wrong. And really, it was a kind gesture. And so we have to be able to recognize when God is talking to us and when the enemy is trying to cause chaos and turn us against other people. Any thoughts or question? Have you ever been in a situation where, things seem to be going right, maybe on your job, and then other people are coming to you, saying maybe a coworker is, in fact, perfect example. There's a situation going on at my job right now where there was an individual that I had recommended for a position, and she got the position. And in the last couple of months, it has just been total chaos. My manager is like really on a vendetta against this person. And so this person called me and asked me, was I sabotaging her? Was I purposely doing things to harm her? And then she starts telling me what, how when they come and say they told me and they this. And I'm like, who are they? And I told her, if you have an issue or somebody's telling you something, then you need to tell me at the time and we can get a hold of it. But there's this whole situation, whole chaos, and I'm in the middle between two people, and both of them are, just really going nuts. And I'm trying to kind of stay out of it, kind of, not get involved. I just want people to come to work and do their job and do what they're supposed to do. But now there's like all this chaos, and one person is stressed, and I have to go off on leave. So, where I had a person who could assist me now is gone, and I have to take back all the work. So it's creating a hardship for me. And so it's just really difficult. But I have determined I'm not listening to the little voices on either side, trying to make me, have ill will against someone else. So I'm just going to mind my own business and, do my job. But, that's how it can be sometimes where, for whatever reason, the devil just gets busy and wants to cause, chaos and confusion.
Yeah, I think what you're speaking to is how people seem to always want to have you align or form an allegiance with them. But I think we as people of God have to allow him to guide us. I think that's kind of what got Solomon in trouble with him entering into all of these marriages, because he wanted peace with these different nations. But ultimately, getting into these allegiances turned him away from God.
Amen. And it wasn't good. God had blessed him in so many other areas. And if he had just depended on God, he wouldn't have had, he wouldn't have had to go down that road. But sometimes, I don't know, we don't give God the credit that he's due. He gives us and does for us whatever we need in the way that we need it. But too many times, and we see it in the Bible over and over again, where people always try to take matters into their own hands, and they just mess up everything. And then not only does it cause problems then, but it's future problems down their line. Look at Solomon, and what happened, after he died, and what happened to the kingdom. So our decisions don't just affect us right now, but it can affect our children and our grandchildren and our great grandchildren. And we can be creating like years and years of hardship because of our disobedience. Oh,
That's crazy you say that because go ahead.
no, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking about a conversation I was sharing with Sister Yvette yesterday where we was talking about decisions you make. A lot of times you make decisions being in a selfish state, but you really don't consult God or think about it. And then years later, you realize the mistakes you made, usually. But I know that is true. We have to learn how to consult God in everything and every decision we make. Because I was listening to you where you were saying that you had recommended the lady for promotion based on, I imagine, her work ethic and the things you have seen her do over the years. But I take it that maybe God should have been consulted in the situation as well. Because regardless, anytime somebody is promoted or moved or appear to have a blessing, the devil always gonna get in the mix anyway, because that's the way he operates.
Amen. And you're absolutely right. Someone called me because they were having a bad time in a particular area. And sometimes we have to be wise, because if everywhere you go chaos follows, if you are the common denominator in that chaos, then it's you. But because, like you said, I'm just hearing this person with a sob story and all this stuff, and I'm like, okay, well, come over here. But if I should have just said, well, I should just said, well, I'll be praying for you. I mean, I don't know what I should have said, but I went out and talked this person up, and she just brought the chaos with her. So sometimes you don't really know what's going on. And you're right. If I had consulted God and asked first, he probably would have just said, no, that's not the one. But
yeah, I think that's where, to your point, recommendations, they can be very perplexing, because you may have had a wonderful experience with someone, but there is no guarantee that in a different environment they will be productive in a place where you may be recommending them. And so I think we have to be careful. Sometimes we may say, yes, this is a phenomenal person, but in the wrong environment or structure, they just may be a terror.
yeah, and that's kind of what it's turned out to be, so. But again, I'm gonna stay out of that one, because it's a little too much going on there. So so David has gone to this king and sent his delegation, and now these people are talking against David. So, verse 4. So Hanun took David's servants and shaved off half of their beards and cut off their garments in the middle as far as their hips, and sent them away. And when they told it to David, he sent to meet them, for the men were greatly humiliated. And the king said, stay at Jericho until your beards grow, and then return. So these men go out there in good faith, and they try to be obedient to David and do what he said to do. And so this new king, he takes these men and he shaves their beards. And so that was a sign of disrespect for them to do that. Shave half of their beards. And then it says they cut their garments. And one of the commentaries I read said that they were cut from the back so that their rears were exposed. So they were kind of they just humiliated them. I don't even know what other word to say. They just wanted to make them look foolish. And if they made them look foolish, they were representation of David, the king of Israel. So they were really slighting David in what they did. And the cool thing about David is, because remember, David used to kind of have a hot temper. Remember when he had asked, what was the wife that he married, Nimrod. And
I thought it was Nabal, but I could be wrong.
Maybe it was Nabal. What was the wife's name?
Abigail.
Abigail, thank you. And so when he sends his men out to ask for, they had been protecting their land and keeping the peace and not letting people come in and rob and steal. And David just asked them, since it was the feast time, harvest time, that they would be willing to share. And when Nabal said no, David got hot. He was sending his men in there to wipe everybody out. But we see he's matured since then. So instead of, he didn't get upset or mad, he was had compassion for his servants, and he told him, he said, okay, just stay here until your beards, grow back, and then you can come back home so you won't be humiliated in your families. And so verse 5, when they told it to David, verse 6, I read that already. Now, when the sons of Ammon saw that they had become odious to David, the sons of Ammon sent and hired the Arameans of Beth Rehob and the Arameans of Zobah, 20,000 foot soldiers, and the king of Makkah with 1,000 men, and the men of Tob with 12,000 men. So they realized what they did wasn't cool, and that David could potentially just come and wipe them out. So they went out to surrounding areas and they asked for help from these other tribes. So they are now amassing an army of over 30,000 men to fight against David. And David had even made a statement of aggression. He didn't go in there and said, okay, I'm going to come there next week with my army and wipe all of you out. He did none of that. So they knew they were wrong. They knew that what they did was disrespectful. And so in preparation for David's response, they're kind of beefing up their army. So when David comes, that they will be prepared. So verse 7, when David heard of it, he sent Joab and all the army and the mighty men. And the sons of Ammon came out and drew up in battle array at the entrance of the city, while the Arameans of Zobah and of Rehob and the men of Tob and Makkah were by themselves in the field. So you have the army surrounding the city, and then you have the men out in the field. And so Joab, if you remember, was David's commander. He was the one who killed Saul's commander, and then when Ishbosheth died in retaliation for his brother being killed. So we have Joab here, and he's out in the battle. So verse 9, so now when Joab saw that the battle was set against him in front and in the rear, he selected from all the choice men of Israel and arrayed them against the Arameans. So he's assessing the battle and he's seeing what's out there. And so he's now placing his men, his army, to fight up against these other people. It says, but the remainder of the people he placed in the hand of Abishai, his brother, and he arrayed them against the sons of Ammon. And he said, if the Arameans are too strong for me, then you shall help me. But if the sons of Ammon are too strong for you, then I will come to help you. So you have these two brothers, they're leaders in David's army. And so they've come up, they have their strategy and they're spread out. One is leading one platoon or battalion or whatever they call, and the other is on the other side. And they're saying, you know, we're going to fight. But if it's too hot for me, you come help me. And if it's too hot for you, I will be there to help you. And so, verse 14, it says, when the sons of Ammon saw that the Arameans fled, oh, wait, missed the verse. 12, sorry. Verse 12. So Joab says, be strong and let us show ourselves courageous for the sake of our people and for the cities of our God. And may the Lord do what is good in his sight. So even Joab is acknowledging that if they win or lose, it's going to be because that's what God decides. Did you say something?
No, I didn't say anything.
Oh, okay. And so he does acknowledge that that God is going to fight, win the battle. And so Joab and the people who were with him drew near to the battle against the Arameans, and they fled before him. And when the sons of Ammon saw that the Arameans fled, they also fled before Abishai and entered the city. Then Joab returned from fighting against the sons of Ammon and came to Jerusalem. So, so their enemies during their fight, I guess they realized that they weren't going to be able to win. So they all fled and, you know, ran back to their cities. And so thus giving Israel victory. And so because of that, Joab and Abishai went back to Jerusalem. In verse 15, when the Arameans saw that they had been defeated by Israel, they gathered themselves together. And Hadadezar sent and brought out the Arameans who were beyond the river, and they came to him, and Shobach, the commander of the army of Hadazar, led them. So now when it was told to David, he gathered all Israel together and crossed the Jordan and came to Helam, and the Arameans arrayed themselves to meet David and fought against him. So they still haven't learned. They already had given up once. So you have another king who's now trying to come out and fight against David. In verse 18, it says, but the Arameans fled before Israel, and David killed 700 charioteers, the guys who ride on the chariots of the Arameans, and 40,000 horsemen, and struck down Shobach, the commander of their army, and he died there. And when all the king's servants of Hadadezar saw that they were defeated by Israel, they made peace with Israel and served them. So the Arameans feared to help the sons of Ammon anymore. So David goes out and they defeated and they give up, and so all these kingdoms realized that Israel was too strong. And so prior to this, you know, again, David was trying to show kindness, but now in the end, he amassed more territory, and these people served him. So in a sense, their action against him only helped him to become even a greater king, and he was even more powerful. And I was reading one of the commentaries, and they said because of this land, now he controlled the ports in and out of these cities, and he controlled the roads, and that was power then of itself, because no one could travel or come back and forth unless he gave them permission, or they controlled all of that. And
Rhonda.
In
18, where it says David slew the men of 700 chariots of the mine says Syrians. They mean all the Israelites together?
I'm thinking David, because it said the 700 charioteers or whatever, and then 40,000 horsemen. Now, I can't imagine that David did that all on his own. So it was his army. It was the army of Israel, because it says that, you know, he gathered them all together and they crossed the Jordan, you know, to meet these people. So it was his army. But yeah. Let me look at another translation. Yeah, it says David. All of them says David slew them or killed them. Yeah, but I'm pretty sure it was David's army. But First Chronicles 19:1 through 19 also provides the same account. And so we can go look at that and see if it reads a little different. Um, but yeah, it was his army. Um, so yeah, hopefully that answers your question. And I'll read those other verses and see if it says anything different. So so any other questions on these last two chapters?
No questions coming from me.
Okay. So I would say a takeaway from me would be, especially for chapter 10, again, we need to be mindful who we're listening to, who we're taking advice from, because listening to the wrong people, taking the wrong advice will have us, going down the wrong path. Fortunately, David and his men and his commanders, they, were cognizant of God and what he can do for them. So it turned out well. But sometimes it doesn't always turn out in our best, especially if we make the wrong decision. And so we need to make sure that we're hearing from God when we do this. And just because a person is in a position of power or influence, um, doesn't necessarily make you know what they say or do right, because if they are talking down or creating conflict themselves, then we know God is not in the midst of chaos and conflict and stuff. And if their actions are producing that, then we know that they are not being led by God or by the Spirit of God. So
So I do have a question on that. So many times when people step into new situations, when they're going through transition, they open themselves up to advice from numerous people. We saw that with Solomon's son. For let's just say recent graduates, we are in a season where a lot of times people are now stepping out of their parents' homes, entering into the real world. How would they be able to discern sound advice? I guess you say, what are keys to the discernment of what advice is sound and what's not sound advice?
what was the last part again? What was what?
I think it's more trying to find a way we can make this applicable to people who are finding themselves taking on advice from various individuals.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. It's I think you should kind of listen with um an ear. There's nothing wrong with seeking out advice from others, especially if people who are experienced, like older people or people that you see have moved in the right direction. But ultimately, whatever advice you get, whether it be from your parents or a mentor or whatever, you should always pray for yourself. And so we're talking about, Christian people, because people who don't have a relationship with God aren't going to be praying, asking God for wisdom. But we should be asking God for wisdom before we make our decisions and wait to hear. And a lot of times we might pray and God will impress upon us or lead us and guide us right then and there. But sometimes we may not hear an answer. And so if you don't get an answer, either yay or nay, then to me, that means that you just need to settle in here until you get a definitive answer. You know, because sometimes when people may think, oh, because God didn't answer me, that means no, or it means I should kind of go with what I'm thinking. But no, God answers all prayers, and we need to wait. And it could be that He will send somebody in your life to offer you guidance and direction. And so that would be my advice to someone who's saved. Pray for yourself, establish that relationship with God for yourself, because sometimes people will give you the advice on what they think you should do, but may not be the best choice for you.
I'm glad you said that about waiting when you don't get an answer, because I've been told on many, many occasions that that not getting an answer is an answer. And I do not agree with that. I don't agree with that. And that is what I do. If God doesn't tell me no, or He doesn't say yes, then to me, it means to wait. Because how can you definitively say, this is what God said, if He didn't say anything? So then you go off and you do whatever it is in your head, and however it turns out, especially if you're not happy with the results, it's just putting you in a position to where you have to accept responsibility for that decision. But if you don't want to, then you start blaming. You blame this person or that person or the enemy or whatever, when no, it's you. Because you can't say what God said. You should always be able to say what God said. If He didn't say anything, then you need to accept that it's you.
Yeah, I agree. And the problem is we don't want to wait. And sometimes whatever God has for us, it's just not ready. It's not the time. We're not ready for it. So we have to wait. He might have to mature us. He might have to take us through some things, or for whatever reason. And sometimes you don't get that particular answer, but the answer is not now. So you just hold steady where you are, and then God will get you an answer. So yes, amen. I agree with you 100%. And on that note, we were going to end Sunday school today, and we will pick up next week in 2 Samuel, starting in chapter 11, verse 1.
Great lesson. Definitely, we hope that those of you who have tuned in found it to be enjoyable. We invite you to join us at 10:30 for our Sunday morning devotion. And for those of you who are in the Southern California area, once again, we do extend a personal invite for you to join us in person for afternoon worship at 4 o'clock. Our our church is located in the city of Ontario. Our address is 110 North Vine Avenue. Come out, and I'm sure you will be blessed. Love you all. See you soon.
Amen.